Welcome back. Well, Professor and historian Noma-langa Mkhize has released children's book detailing decolonized African history. In Africa with Avi and Kumbi covers important themes such as rock art and the rise of ancient civilizations and trade, African philosophy, slavery, colonialism, and struggle for independence. Now, these are weighty issues. Let's further discuss the story with the author, the historian and Professor Noma-langa Mkhize. Professor, thank you very much indeed for coming through. I mean, when we look at the motivation to write this book, what was it?
Well, I was looking for a book for my own child, and such a book didn't exist in the bookshops. So I took it upon myself to write a book that detailed like the history of Africa, but in a way that a child would be able to understand it.
So what age groups are we talking about? What's your target?
The book is targeted towards kids who are between the ages of 8 and 13.
Okay.
But the pictures, the illustrations are drawn in such a way that a 2-year-old would love them.
Right. So that's the attraction. Talk to us about the important themes that this book covers.
Well, the book covers a large portion of Africa's pre-colonial history, which is basically the rise of agriculture, livestock farming, and then the emergence of ancient civilizations from that, ancient patterns of living. And then it goes through into the rise of this, much later in the book, why the transatlantic slave trade happened, the sugar trade and how it impacted Africa, and then obviously colonialism, and then the struggles against colonialism.
I mean, we're talking about slavery, we're talking about colonialism. These are weighty, heavy issues for this age group. When you were conceptualizing this book and considering the target market, what sort of challenges did you envisage?
Well, precisely that, which is how do you put these themes across to children in a way that's not going to kind of brutalize their minds, but in a way that actually helps them to understand just the importance of this kind of history. But a lot of the book is actually about pre-colonial Africa as well. So it's about the fascination of knowing about ancient Nubia, about iron and metal smelting, about things that are actually quite elevating. So the more difficult elements of African history, in particular colonization and slavery, come actually towards the end of the book, because one of my points was to actually show kids that there was a history of Africa prior to the arrival of Europeans and the violence that they enacted upon Africa. I
mean, getting their attention is key, isn't it? I mean, you're competing with the Thundermans and Dora the Explorer and Scooby-Doo. You can see I've got an 8-year-old back at home. So, but I mean, portraying Africa in a fresh and a new way was key as well, isn't it?
It's all about the visual. The most important thing I had to understand is that children are inundated with images from Disney and all this kind of paradigm. That's fine, it's good for our children to see all kinds of things. But we had to be able to draw these images in a way that captures children, but that doesn't stereotype Africans. And that also doesn't downplay the content either. So we worked very hard on the illustrations so that they actually make Africans look like Africans. And that the color was particularly important to us. That the colors are rich in portraying the history.
So you saw a gap that needed to be filled. How important is it for children of that age group to read material that portrays black children in Africa in a positive light, as well as in their own language as well?
So the most important thing for me in this book was to hit into children's curiosity. I assume children are curious. That's how they're built. That's their entire code. It's to be curious and to learn. Nobody has ever asked why children are interested, for example, in general knowledge about ancient Rome or ancient Egypt, which is quite a dominant theme in general knowledge. So why shouldn't they be interested in Africa? Children are interested in that which you put in front of them. So the whole premise behind this book is that children are curious about everything. It's only us who limit them in what we think they should know.
In terms of the reception to this book, what have you heard?
I'm very surprised at the amount of support that people are putting behind this book. It's a limited book. I'm hoping that other writers will get up and do the work and fill the gaps that I couldn't fill in with this book.
Yeah.
But clearly, where mainstream publishers probably think, who's interested in the history of Africa for kids? The audience is telling me, we've been waiting for this book because we don't see it in the shops.
Yeah, yeah. Where can people find this book?
They can find it through online retailers like ethnickids.co.za, loot.co.za, or just your average, bookshop out there. Otherwise, you could go to our website, historyeducation.africa, and get hold of me directly.
Tell us about your career. Is this your first book, or have you written
No,
before?
this is not our first children's book. We've mostly focused, like you were saying, on African languages, on black children reading in their own languages. But with a book like this, we had to cross into the English realm of writing so that it could cover a wide audience at first. We have actually written books in African languages. And again, the premise there is children are curious. They are only as limited by what society and their parents tell them.
Correct. Would you like to see this incorporated in the school curriculum?
Well, if the Department of Basic Education thinks they would like a book like this, then they can feel free to tell me. But precisely because I don't see the style of portrayal in the education curriculum, that's why I wrote the book. They have to have the guts to actually want this type of material in the way that I've portrayed it, in the way that I've put it and enriched it. They must actually get the guts to put the stuff in the curriculum in that way.
When you say guts, what do you mean? What sort of pushback are you expecting?
I think we've had a lot of curriculum problems in South Africa. We can't go into detail about them. But I think the idea that Africa can actually be the center of our children's imaginations hasn't been as strong in our curriculum as it is in other African countries. If you look at the way Ghana, for example, teaches history, if you look at the way Zimbabwe prior to Mugabe's sort of later years, but if you look at the way that Zimbabweans used to teach history, it's a very strong and enriching subject that's meant to actually make the child more critical, more to inquire more, and to want to read more.
Yeah. I mean, history allows us to understand our traditions, our cultures, our principles, our values, and historical memory is important because without that, I mean, you must out on so much perspective and so much enjoyment as well. How can we make history fun again?
So you've hit on it. Historical memory is important. I would say the reason why we saw the Rhodes Must Fall happening was precisely because a youth of a certain generation was saying, you're erasing our historical memory from our curriculums. How to make history fun again is, in fact, to do this. It's for us as black people in particular, we should not fear exploring creative ways of telling our history. We want to see entertainment that delves into our history. We want to see, because this is the way in which children absorb general knowledge about history. That's why we know so much about American history, British history, because it's all over. I mean, if you look at British comedy, it's so deeply seated in their historical sense.
Correct.
And so we have to do that with Africa. We have to take our African heritage and exploit it in the most humanizing and most brilliant and most creative ways that we can do it.
Thank you very much indeed for coming through, and all the best in terms of the sales of this book, and hopefully it'll make an impact in order to broaden our kids' minds in terms of this. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
All right, that was Professor and Historian Nomalanga Mkhize.